All my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, success would finally buy me freedom, maybe even my family's love. But loyalty in my house always meant sacrifice, and every sacrifice was mine. When I finally reached what I thought was escape, when $500,000 a year was finally mine, I walked back into their world with hope in my chest. I imagined my father proud, my mother smiling, my sister telling me she looked up to me. Instead, the celebration turned into something darker. My father demanded I take on his crushing mortgage, as if my paycheck existed to erase his mistakes. My sister wanted me to pay for her fairy tale wedding, her voice sweet but sharp, already counting the money she thought was hers. The room went silent, their eyes on me like predators circling prey. In that moment, every memory of handing over my first paycheck at 14 came rushing back. Every time I was told family comes first, when what they meant was you come last. I realized this was never about love, never about pride. It was about control, and I swore right then it would end with me. Even with that truth burning in me, I still packed my small overnight bag and booked a flight home that weekend. The air in Columbus felt heavier than San Francisco, thicker somehow, carrying memories I thought I had left behind. When I pulled into the familiar driveway, the sight of the old two-story house made my chest tighten. The siding was fading, the shutters crooked, the same way they had been years ago. I climbed the steps, pausing for just a breath before opening the door. Inside, the smell of pot roast filled the air. My mother, Martha, emerged from the kitchen apron on her soft brown eyes, tired but welcoming. She hugged me lightly, almost hesitantly, and called for my father. Thomas appeared from the living room, tall, broad-shouldered, his presence filling the doorway. His hair was thinner now, gray creeping in at the temples, but his voice still carried that same authority that could silence a room. He gave me a firm pat on the back, more like a handshake than a hug. Olivia rushed down the stairs, her blonde hair bouncing her smile wide. She was 3 years younger than me, 31 now, but her energy felt unchanged, the same as when she was a teenager, always at the center of attention. She hugged me tightly and immediately began talking about her wedding plans, about the dress she wanted, the venue she had toured, the guest list that seemed to grow by the hour. We gathered at the table. The plates were set with care. My mother had gone to extra effort. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a pie cooling on the counter. As we filled our plates, I decided to share my news. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, I felt like that little girl again, waiting for my father's approval. I smiled, steadying my voice. I wanted to sound casual, confident. I told them I had been offered the principal cloud architect position at Horizon Tech in San Francisco. I told them the salary, $500,000. For a moment, silence. My mother looked down at her hands folded on the table. Olivia's eyes lit up, and she asked if that meant I would buy a new car, maybe a Tesla, maybe a bigger house. My father leaned back in his chair, watching me, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and spoke in a tone that made my stomach twist. You will take care of the mortgage on this house. 15 years left, $2,300 a month. You will handle it from now on. And you will pay for your sister's wedding. All of it. The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering onto my plate. My mind raced. Did he really just say that? My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear Olivia's delighted gasp. She clapped her hands, exclaiming how perfect it would be, how now she could have the wedding she deserved. I searched my mother's face, hoping for some sign that she would intervene, but she kept her eyes lowered, shoulders tense, lips pressed together. My father's gaze was fixed on me, unwavering, as if daring me to challenge him. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My throat was dry, my palms damp. This was supposed to be a celebration, the moment I finally felt free from the years of being drained, of watching every paycheck vanish into their crises. Instead, I was back in that same chair, the weight of his demands pressing down on me, suffocating. I forced myself to breathe, to find my voice. I asked him if he was serious. His answer came without hesitation. Of course I am. Family takes care of family. You have the means now. We raised you, we sacrificed for you. It is your turn. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Family takes care of family. I had heard it my whole life each time they wanted more from me. Olivia leaned in, her tone sweet but sharp underneath. This is the one thing I have dreamed of, Claire. You have everything, and I just need this one thing. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. The steam from the food on the table seemed to choke me. My father's stare, my mother's silence, my sister's expectant smile, my success, my independence twisted into obligation, into debt I never agreed to. I pushed my chair back slightly, the legs scraping against the worn linoleum. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I felt a tremor in my hands. The warmth I had brought with me from San Francisco, the excitement, the pride, drained away, leaving only a cold heaviness. The pot roast on my plate had lost all taste. I stared at it, unable to eat, my appetite gone. My father leaned back as if the matter was settled, as if my silence was agreement. Olivia began chatting again about flowers and music, her words buzzing in the background like static. I sat there, caught between the family I had always known and the life I had built for myself, the weight of a choice pressing down on me, and I could feel the line that had to be drawn forming inside me, though I had not yet found the strength to speak it aloud. I lowered my gaze, steadying my breath, knowing this dinner was only the beginning of a confrontation that had been waiting years to surface. Chapter 2. Toi Te Birang Book. When I was a kid in Columbus, money was always the center of every conversation, though not in a way that brought comfort. My father Thomas made enough at his job at the dealership, at least on paper, but the truth was swallowed by his gambling trips and his need to control every dollar that entered the house. He carried himself like a man in charge of everything, his deep voice booming through the walls when he called my name, his footsteps heavy on the floorboards, as if reminding us who paid for the roof. My mother, Martha, was the opposite, quiet and careful, never raising her voice above a murmur. She kept the house tidy, went to work at the clinic every morning, and did her best to keep the peace. Her favorite words to me were always the same, said in a hushed tone when I dared question something. "Your father knows best. Do not upset him." Then there was Olivia, 3 years younger than me, the golden child from the moment she could talk. New shoes, new clothes, dance lessons, choir trips. If she asked, she received. I, on the other hand, learned quickly that if I wanted something, I had to earn it myself. At 14, I started bussing tables at a small diner near the highway. I remember the smell of grease and coffee clinging to my uniform, my feet aching after long shifts. Still, I felt proud when I held that first paycheck in my hand, $316 for 2 weeks of sweat and tired nights. I had plans for that money, a new backpack for school, maybe even enough left over to buy a used laptop so I could finally type essays at home instead of in the library. I walked through the front door, the envelope tucked safely in my pocket, my heart racing with excitement. My father sat at the kitchen table, the newspaper spread in front of him, a glass of iced tea sweating onto the wood. He looked up, saw the envelope, and held out his hand. "Family contribution," he said. I hesitated. I told him I needed a backpack, that I had worked for this money. He did not move his hand. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, locked on mine. The silence stretched so long that my excitement withered into fear. Slowly, I placed the envelope into his palm. He opened it right there, counted the bills, nodded as if satisfied, and tucked the money into his wallet. He muttered something about the water bill being due. I never saw a dime of it again. Olivia skipped into the room not long after, twirling in a new skirt my mother had bought her. She kissed my father on the cheek and he laughed soft and warm, the kind of laugh I had never heard directed at me. He pulled a $100 bill from his wallet and handed it to her, telling her to keep up her grades. She squealed and hugged him tight while I stood frozen, my hands still tingling from the empty envelope. That moment carved a line in my memory. I realized then that I was not a daughter to be nurtured, but a resource to be tapped. Our household followed a rhythm that became predictable over the years. Payday, then tension, then silence as my father disappeared for weekends to Las Vegas. He would come home either triumphant with a temporary stash of winnings or angry and bitter after losses. When he lost, we all paid for it. The lights would be cut off, the fridge half empty, the whispers between my parents louder at night. My mother would call her sister to borrow money, or beg me to pick up more shifts at the diner. Olivia was shielded from it all. She never skipped a practice or a trip, never worried about her phone being shut off. I remember one winter when the gas bill went unpaid and the house turned cold. My father barked at me to hand over the tips I had stashed in a jar in my room. I gave them to him, my hands shaking, while Olivia sat curled under a blanket on the couch, complaining about the cold but never lifting a finger to help. My mother whispered apologies, pressing her hand to my cheek as if that could replace the 20 hours of work I had just surrendered. The unfairness burned, but I buried it. I convinced myself that one day I would escape, that I would earn enough to be untouchable. Still, I carried the weight of those years, the endless sacrifices expected without question. By the time I was in high school, Olivia had a car my parents made monthly payments on, while I walked to work in the snow. When she forgot to study and failed a test, my father shrugged it off. When I came home with straight A's, he barely nodded. His approval was reserved for her, his demands for me. I remember one evening sitting at the kitchen table with my mother, the bills stacked high in front of her. She rubbed her temples and whispered that your father knows best. I wanted to scream that he did not. that his gambling was tearing us apart. But the words caught in my throat. I was 16 and the truth was already too heavy to carry. Even then, I dreamed of leaving Columbus, of stepping out into a world where I could breathe without asking permission. I promised myself that when the chance came, I would take it, no matter what it cost. That promise stayed with me quiet but steady. Every time I handed over another paycheck, every time Olivia flashed her new things while I counted coins for bus fare, every time my father's voice echoed through the walls, demanding more. It was a vow I held on to even when it felt impossible, even when the house seemed like a cage I might never escape. And sitting at that dinner table years later, when my father told me I would pay the mortgage and fund Olivia's wedding, that vow stirred again inside me stronger than ever, reminding me of the line I had been destined to draw. When I left for Ohio State University in the fall of 2007, I felt like I was finally pulling away from the weight of that house. I stuffed my clothes and a few books into the back of a borrowed pickup, hugged my mother quickly at the curb, and watched my father stand with his arms crossed, giving me nothing but a curt nod. Olivia cried in the doorway for a moment, but even then I knew her tears were for the attention, not for me leaving. As the truck pulled away, I stared out the window with a mix of fear and exhilaration pounding through me. For the first time in my life, it felt like the door behind me might actually stay shut. Campus life was overwhelming at first. Columbus felt like another planet. The streets buzzed with energy students streaming between classes, laughter spilling from dorm windows, the stadium shaking with chants on Saturdays. My roommates had boxes of snacks and gift cards from home. I arrived with a single suitcase, a used laptop with a cracked corner, and a part-time job already lined up in the dining hall. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here to escape. My days blurred quickly into a cycle of exhaustion, mornings spent racing across campus with coffee in hand, afternoons in crowded lecture halls, evenings wiping down trays and mopping floors. The smell of bleach and grease clung to me long after my shift ended. Every paycheck was a lifeline, and I stretched every dollar until it hurt. Ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, coins counted carefully for laundry. I should have been just another broke college kid, but I wasn't. Because even when I had barely enough for myself, the phone calls would come. It always started the same way, my mother's soft voice breaking through the static. "Claire, your father is short this month. The electric bill is overdue. If we do not pay, the lights will be shut off." She never asked directly, but the pause that followed was enough. I would sit in the library staring at my checking account on the screen, the numbers so low I wanted to close the laptop and run. Each time I whispered to myself that I would say no, and each time I hit send. Once during finals week, the phone rang past midnight. My mother's voice was tight with panic. "Your father took the car to Las Vegas. He promised he would win enough to cover the mortgage. He hasn't come back, Claire." I sat frozen, the highlighter slipping from my hand, my heart pounding like it might crack my ribs. In the silence that followed her words, I opened my account and transferred everything I had saved for textbooks. The next morning I stood in the bursar's office with empty hands, cheeks burning, and begged for an extension. The resentment didn't explode. It built quietly, layer by layer, buried under exhaustion. Each call carried the same unspoken truth that my role was to patch the holes they drilled into their own lives. And each time in the background I could hear Olivia laughing with friends, planning another trip, her voice light, careless, unburdened. She never knew what it cost me to carry the chaos across state lines. The summer after sophomore year, I came home determined to get ahead. I worked long shifts at a grocery store, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing in my skull, the smell of produce and sweat mixing on my clothes. I saved each paycheck, hiding the cash in an envelope taped under my mattress. Each week, the envelope grew fatter, and with it my fragile dream of buying new textbooks, maybe even a refurbished laptop. It was the first time in years I let myself believe in something that belonged only to me. One humid evening, I dragged myself home after a closing shift, the soles of my shoes sticky with spilled soda. I opened my bedroom door and froze. My father was sitting on the edge of my bed, the envelope in his hand. He looked up calm, as if nothing was wrong. "Family contribution," he said. His voice was flat, certain, leaving no space for refusal. I stood there, fists clenched at my sides, throat burning with words I couldn't say. The next morning, the envelope was gone, and so was the dream. By the time I reached my junior year, I had stopped expecting fairness. I built walls inside myself, invisible armor I carried everywhere. I studied harder than ever, burying myself in code until the world outside disappeared. Logic became my refuge. Variables and functions obeyed rules my family never respected. In code, effort equaled results. In code, I was in control. Still, the calls followed. One evening, I sat in the library under buzzing fluorescent lights, my hands trembling over an open notebook. My mother's voice came through the phone, breaking again. Olivia had wrecked her car. No insurance, no savings. She needs your help. I whispered that I couldn't, that my rent was due, that I had nothing extra. She began to cry harder, begging, saying I was her only hope. I pressed my forehead against the desk, tears spilling onto my notes, and in the end I sent it. I walked home in the cold with my account empty and my chest hollow. That night, staring at the ceiling of my narrow dorm bed, I made a vow. When I graduated, I would build a life where their emergencies were no longer mine. I would break the cycle no matter what it cost. I clung to that vow like a secret flame, even as guilt clawed at me. Each time I thought about cutting them off, I saw my mother's tired eyes, heard my father's booming commands, felt Olivia's entitled laughter echoing in my head. I was split between survival and duty, between fear of losing their love and the desperate need to claim my own life. By the spring of 2011, I stood in cap and gown, the stadium echoing with cheers. The sun was hot on my skin, my diploma cool in my hands. Pride surged through me. I had done it despite everything. I searched the stands. Olivia waved and clapped as if she had been part of the struggle. My mother dabbed at her eyes, whispering that she was proud. My father shook my hand. His first words not congratulations, but a question. "What's your starting salary?" The flash of the camera caught my forced smile, but inside the weight pressed down again. I had crossed the stage, but I knew the line I had drawn in my heart would be tested the moment I started earning. Their demands would stretch like shadows into every corner of whatever future I tried to build. As I walked away from the stadium that day, diploma clutched tightly in my hands, I thought freedom was finally within reach. Yet in the pit of my stomach, I felt the shadow of my father's voice, the weight of my mother's silence, and the sting of Olivia's expectations. They would not vanish just because I had earned a piece of paper. I sensed it already, like the smell of rain before a storm. The fight for my life was no longer about survival in that house, but about surviving their grip on my future. I felt both triumph and dread. Triumph that I had survived, dread that I knew the fight for my freedom had only just begun. Chicago was a city that swallowed me whole when I first moved there after graduation. The streets buzzed with traffic, the L trains rattled above, and the winter winds cut through every layer of clothing. My first job was at a small software firm downtown. The office was cramped, with rows of outdated cubicles and the faint hum of fluorescent lights that never stopped flickering. I arrived every morning with a knot in my stomach, clutching a cup of coffee like armor. I was the youngest developer there, and one of the only women. The older engineers looked at me as if I had wandered into the wrong room. I heard their chuckles when I struggled with setting up a server, their quiet remarks that maybe I had been hired because the company wanted diversity points. I forced myself to swallow the humiliation and kept working. During one meeting, a senior developer dismissed my suggestion about optimizing a database query. He waved a hand and said it was too complicated for me to understand. I sat there, cheeks burning, fighting the urge to argue. Later that night, I stayed at the office until nearly midnight, rewriting the code myself. By morning, I had a working prototype that cut processing time in half. When the same senior developer presented it at the next meeting, he called it a team effort. I knew he was taking credit, but I stayed quiet. The paycheck was modest, just enough for rent in a small studio with peeling paint and a heater that rattled like it might give out at any moment. Still, it was mine. I had earned it without handing over an envelope to my father. But the phone calls kept coming. My mother's soft pleas, Olivia's complaints about tuition, my father's booming orders for help with car repairs. I sent what I could, but a small part of me resisted each transfer. One winter project became the turning point. We had been tasked with integrating a new payment system into a client's outdated platform. No one wanted the job, calling it a mess of spaghetti code. I volunteered. Night after night, I stayed at my desk, surrounded by takeout containers and cold coffee, combing through thousands of lines until my eyes blurred. At 2 a.m, the silence of the office broken only by the hum of machines, I finally saw the solution. When I presented the completed integration a week later, the room went silent. The client praised the seamless performance, and for the first time, my manager looked at me with real respect. The senior developers who had mocked me before now glanced sideways, realizing I was not going to fade into the background. That project earned me my first promotion and a salary bump. It was not much, but it meant I could breathe a little easier. Around that time, I attended a technology conference at McCormick Place. The hall was massive, filled with booths, flashing logos, demos, and people in suits shaking hands. I wandered through, clutching a tote bag of brochures, feeling small among the industry veterans. That was when I met Michael Grant. He was a senior architect at a well-known firm, tall with graying hair and the kind of easy confidence that came from years in the field. We struck up a conversation after a session on cloud infrastructure. Unlike the others, he did not look past me or speak down to me. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, nodded at my answers, and shared stories about his own missteps early in his career. We exchanged emails, and over the next months, he became more than a mentor. He was a sounding board, a friend, someone who told me plainly that I was undervaluing myself. He pushed me to apply for roles I would have ignored to demand better pay, to trust my skills. One evening after work, we sat at a diner near the river, plates of fries between us. I confessed my doubts. How every time I felt proud of an accomplishment, I heard my father's voice in my head telling me it was not enough. Michael leaned back, studying me for a moment, then said quietly that I had been carrying a weight that was never mine to carry. His words settled in me like stones shifting, uncomfortable but true. Back at the office, the old habits of belittlement did not stop. But I was different. When another colleague tried to cut me off during a presentation, I kept speaking until the room went silent. My voice did not shake. When I received my next raise, I opened a new account and set up automatic deposits into an investment fund. It was a small step, but it felt like claiming territory that belonged to me alone. At night in my tiny apartment, I would sit by the window overlooking the city lights, fingers curled around a mug of tea, and feel a strange mix of exhaustion and pride. The city outside was relentless, but so was I. Each line of code, each late night, each victory over doubt was proof that I was not the same girl who once handed her paycheck to her father without question. Still, whenever the phone rang with my mother's number, my chest tightened. I knew what she would say before she spoke, knew the tone of quiet desperation, the rehearsed phrases about family obligations. I sent money more often than I wanted, but each time the transfer felt heavier, like a chain I had not yet broken. I told myself that it was temporary, that with each promotion and each dollar saved, I was building something stronger than the grip they had on me. I held on to that thought on nights when the loneliness pressed in, when the city felt too big, when I wondered if freedom would ever truly come. And as the seasons turned in Chicago, with snow covering the sidewalks and spring thawing into humid summers, I felt the foundation of my future slowly taking shape, even as the old demands still clung like shadows at my back. Chapter 5. Dingkao Vetting Ew. The email from Horizon Tech arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was standing at the window of my Chicago apartment, watching the drops race down the glass when my phone buzzed. The subject line read, "Offer Letter." My breath caught as I opened it, scanning the words that felt almost unreal. Principal Cloud Architect. Base salary $500,000. Performance bonuses. Stock options. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, the world spinning around me. I made it. The next few days felt like a blur. I resigned from my job with trembling hands, boxed up my desk, and prepared to leave behind the city where I had scraped and clawed my way forward. Horizon Tech wanted me in San Francisco by early spring. I booked a one-way ticket and signed a lease on a small apartment with a view of the bay, the kind of place I had once only imagined when I stared out at Chicago's skyline from my drafty studio. It was during those weeks of transition that I met Daniel Ramirez. We were introduced by a mutual friend at a networking mixer, a dimly lit bar filled with the chatter of ambitious professionals. Daniel stood out immediately, not just because of his easy smile or his sharp suit, but because when he asked about my work, he actually listened. He was 33, a marketing manager who had grown up in Texas and moved west chasing opportunities. We started talking that night and did not stop. He asked about my projects, my goals, my move to San Francisco. I told him more than I had expected, about the sleepless nights spent debugging, about the satisfaction of seeing my code finally run. He nodded, genuinely interested, and shared his own stories of late nights building campaigns and the pressure of meeting impossible deadlines. Over the next weeks, we met for coffee, then dinner, then long walks through the city. Daniel was steady, grounded, with a warmth that drew me in. For the first time in years, I felt safe lowering the guard I had built around myself. Still, when conversations drifted toward family, I hesitated. One evening, we sat on a bench near the river, the city lights shimmering on the water. Daniel told me about his parents, how they called every Sunday, how they always encouraged him without asking for anything in return. I listened in silence, the weight of my own secrets pressing down. Finally, he looked at me and asked gently what my family was like. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I told him about my father's gambling, about the endless demands, about handing over my first paycheck at 14. My voice cracked when I admitted how even now as an adult, I felt like their financial lifeline. Daniel reached for my hand, his grip steady. He did not flinch or change the subject. He simply said he was sorry I had carried so much alone. The tears came then hot and unrelenting. I had not cried in front of anyone for years. He pulled me close, and for once I allowed myself to lean on someone else. That night marked a shift. I realized how deeply I had buried my pain, how much of my life I had spent pretending I was fine. Meanwhile, Horizon Tech welcomed me with open arms. The offices were sleek and modern walls of glass overlooking the Bay Bridge, buzzing with energy. My new team respected me, sought my input, and trusted my expertise. The contrast to my early days in Chicago was staggering. I was no longer dismissed or spoken over. I was leading shaping systems, making decisions that mattered. The salary was more than numbers on a page. It was validation proof that the years of sacrifice had not been in vain. I opened new accounts, set up investments, and for the first time in my life felt the thrill of security. Yet even as I signed the paperwork and settled into my new role, a part of me braced for the inevitable call from home. Daniel noticed. One night over dinner, he asked why I jumped whenever my phone rang. I confessed that every call from Ohio felt like a demand waiting to be made, another crisis for me to solve. He listened, then said something that stayed with me. "Claire, love is not supposed to feel like a transaction." His words echoed in my mind long after he said them. I thought about the way my father had looked at me across the dinner table, growing up, his hand outstretched for money. I thought about my mother's hushed apologies, about Olivia's endless expectations. And I thought about the way Daniel's family had celebrated his achievements simply because they were proud. For the first time, I began to see the possibility of a different kind of life. A life where my worth was not measured by how much I could give up, but by who I was and what I built. One weekend, Daniel invited me to a small gathering at his apartment. Friends filled the rooms, laughter and music spilling into the hall. At some point, his mother called, and he stepped into the kitchen to answer. I overheard snippets of their conversation, the warmth in his voice, the easy way he told her about his week. When he hung up, he smiled and said they were just checking in, making sure he was eating enough. The simplicity of it nearly undid me. I realized then how much I had missed, how different my life could have been if my family had offered support instead of demands. Later that night, as we walked back to my place under the glow of streetlights, Daniel squeezed my hand and told me he admired my strength. I wanted to believe him, to let that truth sink in. For once, I allowed myself to imagine a future not defined by sacrifice, but by choice. San Francisco stretched out before me, a city of steep hills and endless possibilities. Horizon Tech gave me the platform, Daniel gave me the support, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could finally live on my own terms. Still deep down, I knew the past was not finished with me. My father's voice, my mother's silence, my sister's expectations, they lingered like shadows waiting for the next moment to reemerge. And as much as I wanted to believe I was free, I could already feel the storm gathering, one that would test just how strong those boundaries could be. I flew back to Columbus in late spring, carrying with me the kind of excitement I had never allowed myself before. Horizon Tech had already started preparing my relocation package. Daniel was helping me plan the move, and for the first time in my life, I felt like the pieces were falling into place. I imagined this trip home would be different. I pictured my father proud, my mother smiling, Olivia clapping her hands in excitement. I wanted to believe we could share this moment like a normal family. The house looked the same as always, paint peeling at the edges, the front porch sagging slightly. A wave of memory rushed over me as I stepped out of the car. I could still see my teenage self sitting on those stairs in the cold, clutching my first paycheck, praying Dad would let me keep it. Now standing here with a job offer worth $500,000, I thought maybe that girl had finally earned the right to breathe. My mother met me at the door, hugging me quickly before ushering me inside. The smell of pot roast and baked potatoes filled the air. She had set the table carefully, her way of trying to hold us all together. Her eyes flicked to mine only for a second, and in that instant I saw both relief and worry, as though she already knew what was about to unfold. In the living room, Olivia twirled in a pale blue dress, holding up a wedding magazine. She was glowing with anticipation, showing me pages of gowns she wanted to try, venues she hoped to book. Her voice was high and sweet, but under it was a sharpness and assumption. I smiled politely, though something in her tone felt expectant, as if my role in her plans was already decided. When my father came in from the kitchen, he was in a collared shirt, his expression serious. He greeted me with a firm pat on the back, then sat at the head of the table. The weight of his presence filled the room the way it always had. We gathered around plates filled with food, the clinking of silverware filling the silence. I took a breath, steadying my voice, and told them, I had accepted the principal cloud architect role in San Francisco. Horizon Tech was offering me $500,000 a year, plus bonuses and stock. For a moment, the room was quiet. My mother gave a small nod, her eyes down on her plate. Olivia let out a squeal, saying how amazing that was, how lucky I was, how now I could finally help make her dream wedding a reality. She asked if I would buy her dress, maybe the venue too, as if the money had already been wired into her account. I tried to laugh it off, but my father leaned forward, his gaze sharp. He placed his hands on the table, palms down, and spoke in a tone that left no room for doubt. You will take care of the mortgage on this house. 15 years left, about $2,300 a month. Starting now, it is your responsibility, and you will pay for Olivia's wedding. All of it. The words landed like a blow. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. My chest tightened so hard I could hardly breathe. I searched my mother's face, praying she would object. But she only kept her eyes lowered, her lips pressed into a thin line. Olivia's face lit up, her smile wide as if she had just been handed a gift. My heart pounded. I managed to ask if he was serious. He stared back without hesitation. Family takes care of family. We raised you, we gave you everything. Now it is your turn to give back. The air in the room thickened. Olivia leaned in, her voice sweet but cutting underneath. This is the most important day of my life, Claire. You can do this for me. You should want to. The walls seemed to close in. The steam from the food blurred my vision. I heard the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second heavier than the last. My father's eyes bore into me. My mother's silence screamed louder than words. My sister's expectation wrapped around me like chains. I felt the heat rise in my chest. The words burst out before I could stop them. I worked for this. I earned it. This is not your money, it is mine. I will not hand over my future because you demand it. The room went silent. My father's face darkened, his jaw tightening. He slammed his hand on the table, making the plates rattle. After all we have done for you, this is how you repay us. Selfish, ungrateful. My mother flinched but said nothing. Olivia's smile slipped, replaced by a pout. She muttered that she always knew I thought I was better than her. The knife twisted. I stood up my chair, scraping against the floor, my legs trembling. My father rose as well, his height towering over me, his voice low and sharp. If you walk away from this, Claire, you are walking away from this family. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment I considered backing down, saying what he wanted to hear, surrendering just to feel their acceptance for once. But something inside me, something forged from years of sleepless nights and stolen paychecks, refused. I turned my eyes to him, steady despite the tears threatening to fall, and whispered that I would not be their bank anymore. The words hung in the air, thick and final. My father glared. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Olivia crossed her arms and looked away. I grabbed my bag from the chair, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. My hands shook as I stuffed my charger into the side pocket, trying to keep my breath steady. I stepped out into the night air, cool and damp, the sound of crickets rising from the yard. My hands shook as I fumbled with my keys, my chest tight with a mix of fear and fury. My legs felt like lead as I walked to the car, but each step was a declaration. Behind me, the house stood in silence, its windows glowing faintly against the dark. Inside were the people who had shaped my life, demanding once again that I surrender everything I had fought to build. The house looked smaller somehow, not just in size, but in power, as if the spell it had cast over me since childhood was beginning to crack. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. For the first time, I felt the line drawn clearly in front of me, the choice between the life they demanded and the one I was finally beginning to claim. I sat there, the engine idling, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. But as I stared into the darkened street, headlights still off, a single thought chilled me more than the night air. They were not going to let me go easily. Not my father with his endless debts. Not Olivia with her entitled smile. Not my mother with her silence that spoke of complicity. I knew deep down this confrontation was only the beginning, and the storm it would unleash had the power to destroy everything I had built, if I faltered even once. I drove away from the house that night with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly I thought the leather might tear. The road stretched ahead in darkness, but behind me, the glow of the windows still burned in my rearview mirror like accusing eyes. My chest ached as if someone had pressed a fist into it. I had said the words I had buried for years. I will not be your bank. They were out loud, irreversible. Yet the echo of my father's voice, if you walk away from this, you are walking away from this family, chased me down the highway like a curse. Back in San Francisco, the city felt different. The skyline that once filled me with awe now seemed distant, blurred. I unpacked my suitcase slowly, each folded shirt carrying the scent of pot roast and tension. I tried to slip back into my routine at Horizon Tech, but my mind spun during meetings. My fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than they should have. Even the view of the Bay Bridge outside my office window couldn't distract me. Daniel noticed right away. He showed up one evening with Thai food and a soft look in his eyes. I told him everything, every word of my father's demand, every silence from my mother, every smug smile from Olivia. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush me. When I finished, he reached across the table, took my trembling hand, and said quietly, "Claire, you did the right thing. You do not owe them your life." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let that truth settle inside me, but guilt throbbed like a bruise I kept pressing. I could hear my father's accusations, selfish, ungrateful, playing over and over. A week later, the phone calls began. First from my mother, her voice soft, almost broken. "Claire, he didn't mean it. Your father was angry, that's all. We need to find a way through this." Then from Olivia, her tone syrupy sweet until it sharpened. "Do you really want to ruin the most important day of my life? Don't be dramatic, Claire. You have the money, it's nothing for you." Finally, my father, his voice a growl. "You think you're better than us now. You walk away from this family and you'll regret it." At first I ignored them. I silenced my phone, turned it face down on my desk. But the messages piled up one after another until the screen filled with notifications. Then they started calling my office line at Horizon Tech. The receptionist emailed me politely at first, then urgently, saying family members were trying to reach me. I felt humiliation rise hot in my face. My private war was spilling into my professional life, the one space I thought they couldn't touch. I finally answered one late-night call from my mother. Her voice trembled. "Claire, your father is talking about refinancing the house again. He says if you won't help, he'll take matters into his own hands. He's been calling banks." I could picture him, papers spread across the kitchen table, that old glint of desperation in his eyes. My stomach turned. I hung up without answering. The next day, in a haze of frustration and panic, I called Michael, my mentor. We met at a coffee shop near the Embarcadero. He listened, his jaw tightening as I poured out the story. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice firm. "You need boundaries, Claire. Not suggestions, not half measures, real consequences, otherwise they'll keep pushing until you collapse." His words stayed with me all night. That weekend, Daniel and I sat on the couch, stacks of papers and unopened mail spread out on the coffee table. I made a list of everything that tied me to them financially. Old family phone lines still in my name. A joint internet account I had signed for years ago. Streaming services Olivia had begged me to keep open. One by one I canceled them, my hands shaking at first, then steadier. It felt like cutting cords that had bound me for too long. But freedom was fragile. A week later, Olivia posted on Facebook about her upcoming wedding. She tagged me in the post with a line that made my blood boil. "So grateful my sister Claire is making my dream day possible." Hundreds of comments flooded in congratulating her, praising me for my generosity. My inbox filled with messages from distant relatives and old neighbors saying how proud they were of me. I sat staring at the screen, my pulse racing. She was rewriting the narrative, turning me into the villain if I refused. Daniel found me hours later frozen at my desk. He read the post, clenched his jaw, and asked what I wanted to do. My voice cracked when I whispered, "She's trying to trap me. If I back out now, I look like the monster." The storm escalated when I received an email from Horizon Tech HR. They requested a meeting. My stomach dropped. When I sat across from Melissa Carter, the HR director, she explained that the company had received multiple calls from people claiming to be my family. They accused me of abandoning them, of refusing to cover basic needs, of ruining my sister's wedding. Melissa's tone was sympathetic but professional. "Claire, we respect you, but these kinds of personal disputes can't bleed into your work. You need to get this under control." Shame washed over me. My father's voice. My mother's pleas. Olivia's demands. They had followed me across the country, into the one place I thought was mine alone. That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights shimmering below, and felt the walls closing in again. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Janet Brooks, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice. I told her everything, from the stolen paychecks at 14 to the $500,000 demand now. She listened without flinching, then said firmly, "This is harassment. Family or not, you have the right to protect yourself. I can draft a cease and desist letter." The words felt both terrifying and liberating. Legal action against my own family. It seemed unthinkable, almost cruel. But hadn't they been cruel first? Hadn't they used me like an ATM for 2 decades? That night I signed the papers. My hand trembled, but when the ink dried, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly, but resolve. Days later, my phone erupted. Voicemails stacked up one after another. My father's voice thundered with rage, calling me a traitor, saying I had shamed the family. My mother's messages were softer but sharper in their disappointment. I never thought my daughter would treat us like strangers. Olivia's texts poured in like venom. You've destroyed everything. You're no sister of mine. I sat on the floor of my apartment, my phone buzzing relentlessly on the table beside me, tears streaming down my face. Daniel held me, his arm steady around my shaking body. You're not wrong, he whispered. You're not cruel, you're surviving. But even as I cried into his shoulder, one thought carved its way through the chaos sharper than all the rest. They weren't finished. They had lost control of me and they would not accept it quietly. This was only the beginning of a war I hadn't wanted, but one I could no longer avoid. And for the first time in my life, I felt the fire of something more than survival. I felt the first stirrings of revenge. The call from HR came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was settling into my new office at Horizon Tech. The sunlight from this bay poured through the glass walls, glinting off whiteboards covered in diagrams. I was scrolling through project notes calm for once, when my desk phone lit up with an internal extension. Melissa Carter. My stomach dipped. Her voice was polite, clipped, but I caught the steel underneath. Claire, can you come by my office right away? The hallway felt too bright as I walked toward her door. Melissa sat behind a spotless desk, a framed photo of her kids, the only warm thing in the room. She gestured for me to sit. I lowered myself into the chair, my palms damp against my skirt. She folded her hands and fixed me with an unblinking stare. We've received a series of phone calls from your family in Ohio. They've left voicemails, spoken to our receptionist, even tried to reach your manager. They're claiming you've abandoned them. They say your parents are losing their home and your younger sister can't afford her wedding because you refuse to help. Her words cut through me sharper than any blade. My body burned with shame. My private life, the one I had fought tooth and nail to keep separate from my work, was now plastered across the halls of Horizon Tech. I stammered somethings about it being complicated, that I was handling it, that it wouldn't interfere with my performance. Melissa's expression softened only slightly. Claire, perception matters here as much as results. You need to fix this before it stains your reputation. I walked out of her office like someone had punched me in the gut. The open workspace buzzed with keyboards clacking, coworkers laughing, servers humming in this background. But all I heard was my father's voice booming in my head. If you walk away from this, you walk away from this family. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone as notifications stacked up like bricks on my chest. Voicemails, missed calls, text messages. My father's voice thundered in, one calling me selfish, a disgrace. My mother trembled, begging me to think of them, to remember everything they had sacrificed. Olivia's was sharp, cruel, dripping with entitlement. You've ruined my life, Claire. Everyone knows you're supposed to pay. I pressed the phone face down on the table, but the vibration kept rattling it across the wood like it wanted to crawl back into my hands. Daniel came over and found me hunched forward, arms wrapped around myself, eyes red. He picked up the phone, silenced it, and placed it far out of reach. You don't have to fight them alone, he whispered. But I still felt like the frightened teenager sitting at that kitchen table in Columbus, powerless against my father's grip. The next morning I called Michael. I poured everything out, my words tumbling fast, shaky, breaking in places. He listened quietly, then let out a long breath. Claire, you need consequences. Without them, they'll keep pushing until you collapse. His advice sent me to Janet Brooks, a lawyer recommended by a colleague. Her office was tucked inside a modest downtown building. No flash, no corporate polish, just a woman with sharp eyes, shelves of thick books, and a calm that felt unshakable. I sat across from her, hands twisting in my lap, and laid out everything. From the stolen paycheck at 14 to the midnight calls in college, to the demand for $500,000 to the harassment at Horizon Tech. Janet didn't flinch. When I mentioned HR, her eyes narrowed. She said it plainly. What they are doing is harassment. Family or not, it crosses the line. We can start with a cease and desist letter. It will formally demand they stop contacting you at work. If they continue, we escalate. The thought terrified me. Taking legal action against my own family. It felt unnatural, wrong. But Janet leaned forward. If these were strangers harassing you, would you tolerate it? My throat tightened. I shook my head. Exactly, she said. Family doesn't make it legal. That evening I signed the documents. My hand trembled across the page, but when I set down the pen, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Control. 2 days later, the letter landed on the doorstep of that sagging house in Columbus. The storm came instantly. My phone exploded. My father's rage tore through the voicemails like fire. You betrayed us. You brought shame on this family. You'll regret this, Claire. My mother's voice was softer but cut deeper. I don't understand how my daughter could do this to her parents. Olivia's texts were venomous on the screen. You're dead to me. My wedding is ruined. I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone buzzing over and over, tears streaking down my face. My whole body shook, yet beneath the fear, something stronger stirred. Each hateful word confirmed why I had taken this step. Daniel wrapped his arms around me as I shook. He whispered in my ear, steady and calm, "You're not alone. You're not wrong. You're surviving." But the war wasn't confined to phone lines anymore. The next morning, a coworker mentioned seeing Olivia's Facebook post. My stomach dropped as I pulled it up. There it was, her face glowing, standing in front of a bridal shop mirror, captioned with a dagger. "Can't believe my own sister is refusing to pay for her little sister's wedding, after everything our parents did for her. Ungrateful, family first." Hundreds of comments flooded the post. Strangers chimed in, friends from high school I barely remembered, distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. They called me selfish, heartless, greedy. Some even tagged Horizon Tech, demanding to know why they would employ someone who abandoned her family. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the phone. They weren't just trying to shame me, they were trying to ruin me. That night, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table again. He held my gaze as he said, "They want to control the story. You need to take it back." With Janet's guidance, I filed a harassment report and instructed her to prepare a defamation case if the online attacks continued. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my name, my career, my right to exist outside of their grip. The weight of years pressed down on me, but for the first time, I wasn't just defending myself, I was fighting back. I silenced my phone, logged off social media, and sat in the quiet of my apartment. The city outside buzzed alive and indifferent. I sipped tea with Daniel's hand steady over mine, my chest still tight but my resolve sharp. My family had dragged the war into my workplace, into my online world, into my very identity. But now I had a shield, the law, my voice, the truth. As I lay back against the pillows that night, the Bay Bridge glowing faintly in the distance, I knew this was no longer just survival. It was a counterattack. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I was preparing to strike. The weeks after the cease and desist felt strange, like walking through a quiet field knowing a storm could still be brewing just over the horizon. The calls slowed but did not vanish. Sometimes a new number appeared. Sometimes an email slipped through, short messages that pulled at old guilt. I kept them unread, pushing the weight of them into a folder I did not want to open. Daniel suggested I talk to someone beyond friends or lawyers. That was how I found myself in the office of Dr. Angela Lee, a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Her office was warm walls painted in soft earth tones, shelves lined with plants that caught the afternoon light. She listened as I spilled out the story, my words halting at first, then tumbling faster, years of silence breaking open. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly, her tone calm. "What you are experiencing is normal. Guilt, second-guessing, even the exhaustion in your body. These are the symptoms of breaking patterns that have existed your entire life. You are learning to set boundaries where none existed before." Her words steadied me, though the guilt still pulsed underneath. One weekend, Daniel took me to Texas to meet his parents. I expected tension, questions, and hidden judgment. Instead, I found warmth that unsettled me. His mother hugged me the moment I walked in. His father asked about my work with genuine interest, and the dinner table was filled with laughter that did not carry hidden barbs. They asked about my life not to find weaknesses, but because they cared. I sat there, the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread around me, and felt tears prick my eyes. This was what family could be. On the flight home, I stared out the window, clouds glowing pink with sunset, and thought about what I wanted from my own family. I did not want to sever ties forever, not if there was any chance of something healthier. I decided to reach out. Back in San Francisco, I drafted a letter. My hands shook as I typed, but each word felt necessary. I told them I was willing to provide limited financial help, but only under clear conditions. A small monthly contribution toward the mortgage if expenses were shared, transparently. A modest gift toward Olivia's wedding, not the extravagant event she imagined, but something reasonable. The terms were clear. Respect and boundaries had to come first. I sealed the letter, mailed it, and waited. For days I carried a small hope inside me, fragile but bright. Maybe this time they would understand. Maybe we could rebuild something new. The response came in a thick envelope with my father's handwriting scrawled across the front. I opened it with trembling fingers, Daniel standing nearby. The letter inside was short, written in my father's bold strokes. "We do not need your charity with strings attached. Either you take care of your family properly or you are no family at all. The words hit harder than I expected. My knees gave way and I sank into a chair, staring at the page until the letters blurred. The hope I had carried cracked apart, leaving only the familiar ache of disappointment. My father's voice echoed in those lines, my mother's silence hung between them. My sister's entitlement dripped from every word. I pressed the letter flat on the table, my hand trembling as I smoothed it. Daniel rubbed my shoulder quiet, giving me space. I whispered that I had truly believed maybe this time it could change. He told me gently that the refusal said more about them than about me. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the city quiet outside my window. I thought of the years I had poured into them. The paychecks surrendered. The tears swallowed the sacrifices unnoticed. I thought of my mother's tired eyes, my father's unyielding stare, Olivia's endless demands. And now, finally, I thought of the choice in front of me. The next morning, I folded the letter back into its envelope and tucked it away in a drawer. It no longer felt like a wound demanding my attention. It felt like proof that no matter what I offered, it would never be enough, because what they wanted was not help but control. As I locked the drawer, I felt something shift inside me, painful but clean, like a bone finally setting after years of being broken. I did not know yet what my relationship with them would become, but I knew the old cycle was gone. But my family was not finished. Within a week, Olivia turned to Facebook again. This time not just a single post about her selfish sister, but a full campaign. Pictures of the house in Columbus with captions like, "Abandoned by our daughter." Posts about canceled wedding plans blaming me directly. She tagged Horizon Tech in every one, trying to drag my company's name into her tantrum. The comments multiplied, not just strangers now, but old classmates, neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Some pitied them, others ridiculed me. A few even shared my photos with words like heartless witch. A gossip blog picked up the story. By Friday, my name was circulating on Twitter, tied to hashtags I never asked for. Melissa from HR called me in again. Her voice was firm, but less sympathetic this time. "Claire, this is spiraling. We need reassurance that this won't damage Horizon's reputation." I left her office with a stone in my stomach. My family had escalated the fight into the public sphere. It no longer whispers behind closed doors. It was a spectacle. I called Janet that evening. Her tone was sharp when she heard about the posts. "This is defamation, plain and simple. We can file." I hesitated, the old fear tugging at me. "They're my family." Janet didn't soften, "And they are publicly attacking your career. It's time to stop reacting and start holding them accountable." Daniel sat beside me as I agreed. The next day, Janet drafted formal notices demanding Olivia remove the posts or face legal action. She also began preparing a case for defamation should they continue. The silence after the letters were sent was brief. My father called from a blocked number, his voice booming in a voicemail I forced myself to save. "You think you can drag this family into court? You're no daughter of mine." My mother's text was quieter, but no less cutting. "Please stop this. You're tearing us apart." Olivia doubled down online, claiming I was suing her for wanting a wedding. For the first time in my life, I did not flinch. I forwarded everything to Janet. Each screenshot, each voicemail, each post. She told me, "Good. Keep documenting. The more they escalate, the stronger your case becomes." The fight had gone public, but so had my resolve. I met Michael for coffee that week, exhaustion written in the lines of my face. He listened, then said something I had not expected. "Claire, this isn't just about money anymore. This is about showing them you're not the child they can control. You're the adult who holds the power now." His words burned through me, not as comfort, but as clarity. For the first time, I believed them. That night, I sat at my desk overlooking the bay, the lights of San Francisco flickering like quiet witnesses. I drafted a statement not for Olivia's Facebook or for the gossip blogs, but for myself. A declaration I would not post but would carry. I wrote, "I will not be your bank. I will not be your scapegoat. I will not be your prisoner." I closed the journal, the words carved into me like stone. The storm was still raging louder than ever. But for once I wasn't just standing in the rain. I was building lightning in my own hands. A year passed faster than I thought it would. San Francisco became home in ways I had never expected. My apartment near the Embarcadero filled with the sound of my own routines. The quiet comfort of mornings spent with coffee at the window. The hum of the city waking beneath me. At Horizon Tech, I thrived leading projects that challenged me, earning respect I once thought was reserved for others. The weight I carried for so long grew lighter with each passing month, though the scars were still there. But the silence did not last forever. My family's bitterness had simmered too long, and eventually it boiled over again. It started with Olivia. She created a blog where she published post after post about her cruel, selfish sister. She wrote that I had abandoned her on the eve of her wedding, that I had forced her to marry in a shabby hall while I lived like a queen in California. Her words were venom dressed as grief, and they spread quickly, picked up by people hungry for drama. Some readers believed her. Others mocked her entitlement, but the damage was done. My name was once again being dragged through the mud. Then came my father's turn. He went on a local Columbus radio show, ranting about how ungrateful children were destroying the values of family. He did not mention me by name, but he did not have to. Everyone who knew us understood. Clips of his angry tirade spread online, paired with Olivia's blog posts, weaving a narrative of betrayal. For a few days, I felt the old panic return. My chest tightened as I read comments, as colleagues whispered about the noise online. But this time, I was not the same frightened girl handing over a paycheck in silence. This time I had evidence, allies, and a choice. I forwarded everything to Janet Brooks. She called me the next morning, her voice sharp with conviction. "Claire, they've crossed every line. Defamation, harassment, malicious intent. We can file suit, not just a warning this time, a lawsuit." The thought terrified me, but also thrilled me. For years I had fought quietly, pulling away in small steps. Now I had the chance to turn their own weapons against them, to expose their lies with the truth I had carried for so long. With Janet's guidance, I gathered everything. Bank records showing the money siphoned from me since I was 14. Voicemails of my father demanding I take his mortgage. Olivia's posts accusing me of ruining her wedding while I paid for her car. Repairs in college. Even the cease and desist letter they had mocked. Proof that they had been warned and chose to escalate. When the suit was filed, the story flipped. Local reporters picked it up first, then national outlets. Headlines no longer read "Daughter Abandons Family," but "Tech Architect Sues Family for Harassment and Defamation." For the first time, my voice was amplified. Social media exploded. Strangers debated my choices, but many sided with me now. They saw the pattern of exploitation, the years of demands, the audacity of a family that believed they were owed a $500,000 salary. Hashtags that once painted me as selfish now turned into support. "Break the cycle and not your bank." My father raged publicly. Olivia wailed online. My mother stayed silent. But the more they protested, the worse they looked. Clips of my father's gambling debts resurfaced. Old neighbors came forward with stories of how I had worked 3 jobs in high school while Olivia was pampered. The court of public opinion was no longer theirs to control. The legal process dragged on, but I no longer felt powerless. Each hearing was another step forward, each filing another layer of protection. I stood in courtrooms in tailored suits, steady in my voice. While my father fumed and Olivia cried, the judge reminded them repeatedly that this was not about family feelings, but about boundaries and law. Outside the courthouse one day, a reporter asked if I felt guilty airing family matters in public. I looked straight into the camera and answered calmly. What is family? If it is built on control and silence, setting boundaries is not betrayal. Sometimes the only way to stop abuse is to name it. That clip went viral. For the first time, I felt not only defended but understood. Messages poured in from strangers, especially women. Telling me my story gave them courage to set their own boundaries. Revenge had taken a shape I had not anticipated, not destruction, but empowerment. Months later, the case settled. My father and Olivia were forced to retract their statements publicly, their blog posts and radio clips scrubbed with official apologies. Financial penalties were imposed, modest but symbolic. The weight was no longer mine. For once, they bore the consequences. I received one final call from my mother afterward. Her voice was tired, older somehow, but clear. She said she hoped someday I could forgive them, but she understood if I never did. She admitted quietly that she had stayed silent too long. Before I could respond, she hung up. When I set the phone down, I realized I felt no rage, no guilt, only release. On the anniversary of my first day at Horizon Tech, I stood in my apartment, surrounded by friends' laughter filling the rooms. Michael raised a glass in my honor, reminding me how far I had come since that conference years ago. Daniel squeezed my hand, smiling as if to say he had always known I could do it. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe them fully. Later, after the last guest had left and the city was quiet again, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I wrote about the girl I had been at 14, handing over her paycheck to a man who never saw her as more than a source of money. I wrote about the woman I had become, the one who took her family to court and refused to let her worth be defined by anyone else. Revenge, I realized, had not come in the form of shouting or retaliation. It had come in the shape of truth revealed, of boundaries enforced, of a life well lived without chains. My family had lost the control they once wielded, and I had gained something far greater. I closed the journal, set down my pen, and looked out at the city lights reflecting on the water. The future stretched before me wide and unclaimed, and for the first time in my life, it was entirely mine. There are nights when I still wake up to the echo of my father's voice, sharp and demanding, as if the walls of that old Columbus house are closing in on me again. But then I open my eyes and see the bay glimmering outside my window, the city alive beneath me, and I remember, I am not that girl anymore. For years I believed survival meant silence, that love was measured in sacrifice, that my worth was bound to how much I could give. They raised me to think boundaries were betrayal, that family came first even when it destroyed me. And for years I obeyed. I handed over every paycheck, every ounce of energy, every piece of myself they demanded, until there was nothing left. But the truth is, silence was the real betrayal. Betrayal of the child I had been, of the woman I was becoming, of the life I deserved to claim. Breaking the cycle was not easy. It tore at me, filled me with guilt so heavy I could barely breathe. But survival is not selfish. Survival is justice. Taking them to court was never about revenge in the loud, violent sense. It was about reclaiming my voice after decades of being silenced. It was about showing them and myself that abuse wrapped in the word family is still abuse. That love without respect is not love at all. When the judge forced them to retract their words, when the world finally saw the truth, I felt a weight lift that I had carried since I was 14 years old. And I realized then that revenge was not about watching them fall. Revenge was about standing tall myself, unbroken, untethered. Now, when I look ahead, I no longer see chains or debts or endless demands. I see possibilities. My life belongs to me. My success is mine to savor. And my story is proof that even the deepest wounds can heal if you are brave enough to stop bleeding for people who never deserved your sacrifice. The girl who once believed love had to be earned with pain is gone. In her place stands a woman who knows her worth, who has taken back her name, her future, her peace. That I've learned is the most powerful revenge of all.